Welcome to my Channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The album showed me holding my own funeral program, 3 days before I found it in the photograph. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I've been turning it over in my mind for weeks now, trying to make sense of what happened. But before you click away, before you dismiss this as just another creepy story, let me ask you something. When was the last time you really looked at your old photo albums? I mean, really looked at them? Because I'm starting to think we all have one of these albums. We just haven't noticed yet. If you're still listening, if you're brave enough to hear what I discovered, then settle in. Maybe grab something to hold on to. And whatever you do, don't check your photo albums tonight, not until you've heard the whole story. The story begins now. My name is Sarah Chen, and 3 months ago, I made the biggest mistake of my life at an estate sale in Portland, Maine. It was one of those perfect October Saturdays. You know the kind. The leaves were doing that thing where they look like they're on fire, all reds and golds against the gray sky. I'd been hitting estate sales all morning, looking for vintage items for my Etsy shop. Old typewriters, brass candlesticks, that sort of thing. The kind of stuff that millennials like me buy to make our apartments look like we have more personality than we actually do. The house was on Brackett Street, one of those old Victorians that probably had more history than the entire strip mall where I worked my day job. The estate sale was winding down when I got there, around 3 in the afternoon. Most of the good stuff was already picked over. Broken clocks, chipped teacups, the usual leftovers. But then, I saw it. Tucked behind a stack of water-damaged National Geographics, there was this leather-bound photo album. The leather was this deep burgundy color, like dried blood, though I didn't think of it that way at the time. It felt warm under my fingers, which was weird because the basement was freezing. October in Maine, you know? But this album, it was warm, like it had been sitting in sunlight, even though we were in a windowless basement. "How much for this?" I asked the woman running the sale. She was maybe 70, wearing one of those quilted vests that every Maine grandmother seems to own. She looked at the album and her face changed, just for a second, like someone had walked over her grave. "Oh, that was Mrs. Blackwood's. She was very particular about that album." The woman rubbed her arms like she was cold. $20? $20 for a vintage leather album? That was a steal. I should have known right then. Nothing good comes that cheap. "Did you know Mrs. Blackwood?" I asked, counting out the bills. The woman took my money quickly. Too quickly. She kept to herself mostly. Lived here alone for the last 40 years after her husband passed. No children, no family that we could find. Just her and her photographs. I tucked the album under my arm. It was heavier than it looked. Dense, like it was filled with more than just pictures. "Funny thing about that album," the woman called after me as I headed for the stairs. I turned back. She was wringing her hands now, looking everywhere but at me. "Mrs. Blackwood used to say it had a mind of its own, said it showed her things." She trailed off, shaking her head. "Showed her things?" I prompted. Nothing. Just an old woman's fancy. She was 93 when she passed. The mind plays tricks at that age." I should have put the album back, should have walked away. But I was already imagining the Instagram post. Vintage leather album, perfect for wedding photos or scrapbooking. Link in bio. I could probably get $60, maybe $70 for it. I thanked the woman and left. The album warm against my side like a living thing. That night, I brought it back to my apartment in Portland's East End. Just a typical one-bedroom, exposed brick, rattling radiators, a view of the parking lot if you stood on your tiptoes and craned your neck just right.
I set the album on my kitchen table and made myself a cup of tea before opening it. The first page made me pause. It was a photograph of Mrs. Blackwood. I assumed it was her anyway. A young woman, maybe 25, standing in front of the very house where I'd bought the album. She was wearing one of those 1950s dresses with the full skirt, and she was smiling. But there was something off about her eyes. They seemed to be looking at something just behind the camera, something that frightened her. I turned the page. The next photo was the same woman, but older now, maybe 35, standing in the same spot, wearing a different dress, but her smile was smaller. Her eyes, they weren't looking behind the camera anymore. They were looking directly at it, at me. Page after page, I watched Mrs. Blackwood age. Always in front of that house. Always in a different outfit. But as the years passed in the photographs, something else changed too. In the background, in the windows of the house, there were shadows. At first, I thought it was just the way the light hit the glass. But the more I looked, the more the shadows seemed to have shape, form. They looked like people. By the time I reached the middle of the album, Mrs. Blackwood was elderly. Her smiles were gone, and the shadows in the windows, they were pressed against the glass now, dark figures with their hands splayed against the panes like they were trying to get out, or trying to get in. The last photograph in the album was recent, very recent. It showed the elderly Mrs. Blackwood standing in front of the house one final time, but she wasn't alone. A shadow stood beside her. Not behind glass anymore, but right there next to her. It had its hand on her shoulder, and Mrs. Blackwood's eyes, they were looking directly at the camera again, looking at me. And I swear she was trying to warn me about something. I closed the album quickly, my hands shaking. My tea had gone cold. Outside, the October wind rattled my windows, and I found myself checking them, making sure there were no shadows pressed against the glass. That's when I noticed the time. 11:58 p.m. I don't know why, but I felt compelled to watch the clock, to wait. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. 11:59. And then, midnight. The album on my table made a sound, like leather stretching, like something breathing. I wanted to run, wanted to leave the apartment, but I couldn't move. I could only watch as the album fell open by itself, the pages fluttering like wings until they settled on a new photograph. A photograph that hadn't been there before. It showed my apartment, my kitchen table, taken from the exact spot where I was standing. And in the photograph, sitting at the table, was me. But I was looking at something the camera couldn't see, and my face wore the same expression Mrs. Blackwood had in that first photo, like I was looking at something that frightened me, something just out of frame. I slammed the album shut and backed away from the table. My rational mind was screaming that this was impossible. Photos don't just appear. Albums don't update themselves. But the warmth I'd felt from the leather earlier, it was stronger now, like the album was alive, like it was feeding on something. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my living room with every light on, watching the kitchen doorway, waiting for I don't know what. When the sun finally came up, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Stress from work, too much caffeine, too many horror podcasts before bed. But I had to check, had to know. I opened the album again in the bright morning light. The new photograph was still there. Me, at my kitchen table, looking afraid. And as I stared at it, I noticed something else. In the background, barely visible in the doorway behind me, a shadow. I tried to get rid of the album. The next day, Sunday, I drove back to Brackett Street. The estate sale was over, of course, the house locked up with a for sale sign in the yard. I left the album on the porch with a note. Please return to family. But when I got home that evening, there it was, on my kitchen table, exactly where I'd first placed it.
I tried throwing it in the dumpster behind my building. It came back. I tried leaving it at Goodwill, at the library, even at a church, though I was careful not to mention anything about why I was donating it. Each time I'd return home to find it waiting for me, always on the kitchen table, always warm to the touch, and every night at midnight, a new photograph. The second night, it showed me at work. I'm a graphic designer at a small marketing firm downtown, and the photo captured me at my desk, staring at my computer screen. But in the reflection on the screen, that same shadow, closer now, close enough that I could almost make out features. Almost. The third night. The photo showed me sleeping. I lived alone. My apartment was on the third floor. There was no way anyone could have taken that photo. But there I was, curled on my side, blankets pulled up to my chin, and standing at the foot of my bed. The shadow was no longer just a shadow. It was starting to look like a person, a woman. Her face was still obscured, but I could make out long hair, a dress, hands that seemed to be reaching. I stopped sleeping in my bedroom after that. By the end of the first week, I was a wreck. I called in sick to work, couldn't eat, jumped at every sound. I started researching the Blackwood house, hoping to find some explanation. What I found only made things worse. Margaret Blackwood had lived in that house for 43 years. Her husband, Thomas, had died in 1981 in what the Portland Press Herald called a tragic accident. He'd fallen down the basement stairs in the middle of the night. Margaret had found him the next morning. But here's the thing. I found Thomas Blackwood's obituary, and it mentioned that he was an amateur photographer. Known for his candid portraits, the obituary said. Thomas had a gift for capturing people in their most honest moments. I dug deeper, found a microfiche archive at the Portland Public Library with more articles about the Blackwoods. It seems Thomas had been quite well known in the local art scene in the 1970s. His photographs had been displayed in galleries throughout New England. But after his death, all of his work had vanished. Margaret had claimed she'd destroyed it all. Too painful to keep, she'd said. But there was one article from 1979 that made my blood run cold. It was about a photography exhibition Thomas had done called Future Tense. The reviewer described it as unsettling and prophetic. The photographs, according to the article, showed people in moments that hadn't happened yet. Mr. Blackwood claims his camera can capture tomorrow, the reviewer had written. While we must admire the technical skill of the compositions, the claim itself is, of course, absurd. Though I must admit, several subjects of the portraits seemed disturbed by what they saw. The article included one grainy reproduction of a photograph from the exhibition. It showed a man standing at a street corner, looking at his watch. The caption read, James Morrison, Congress Street, June 15th, 1979. I searched for James Morrison, found his obituary. He'd died on June 15th, 1979, hit by a bus while crossing Congress Street, while, according to witnesses, checking his watch. I sat back in the library chair, my hands shaking. Thomas Blackwood's camera didn't capture tomorrow. It captured death. That night, I couldn't bring myself to go home. I knew the album would be there, waiting. I knew that at midnight another photograph would appear. So I did what any rational person would do. I got a hotel room. But at 11:55, I found myself walking back to my apartment. I couldn't help it. It was like the album was calling me, like I needed to see what it would show next. I made it home just as the clock struck midnight. The album was on the kitchen table, already open to a new page. And the photograph. Oh God, the photograph. It showed me in my apartment, but not alone. The shadow woman was clear now. She stood behind me, her hands on my shoulders, her face finally visible. It was Margaret Blackwood, but not the elderly woman from the estate sale. This was the young Margaret from the first photos in the album, the one who'd looked so afraid. But she wasn't afraid anymore. She was smiling, and in the photograph, I was smiling too, like we were old friends, like this was exactly where I was supposed to be. I looked closer at the photo, and that's when I noticed the date printed in the corner. These old cameras, they sometimes had date stamps, you know? This one read, October 31st, Halloween, 3 weeks away. In the photograph, Margaret and I stood together in my apartment. But behind us, through the window, I could see something else. Other figures, dozens of them, all standing in the parking lot, looking up at my window, waiting. I grabbed my phone and called my sister in California. It was only 9 there, she'd still be awake. Jess, it's Sarah. I need to tell you something, in case something happens. Sarah? What's wrong? You sound terrible. I told her everything. The album, the photographs, Margaret Blackwood. She listened, and I could hear the concern in her voice growing with each detail. You need to get out of there, she said when I finished. Come stay with me for a while. We'll figure this out together. I can't leave, I heard myself say, even though that wasn't what I meant to say. The album won't let me. What do you mean the album won't? Sarah, listen to yourself. It's just a book. Old pictures. You're having some kind of breakdown. But I'd already hung up. Because I'd heard something. A sound from the bedroom. Footsteps. I wasn't alone anymore. I need you to understand something. I'm not crazy. I know how this sounds. I know that everything I'm telling you defies logic, defies reason. But sometimes the world shows us things that don't fit into our neat little boxes of reality. Sometimes the impossible becomes inevitable. The footsteps in my bedroom stopped, then started again. Slow, deliberate, like someone was pacing, like someone was waiting. I stood frozen in my kitchen, phone still in my hand. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but where could I go? The album always found me. And deep down, God help me, part of me wanted to know, wanted to see who was in my bedroom. Margaret? My voice came out as a whisper. The footsteps stopped. Then, slowly, my bedroom door opened. But no one came out. The doorway was empty, just darkness beyond. But the darkness seemed thick, like it had weight, like it was watching me. I took a step backward, and that's when I heard the voice. Not from the bedroom, from right behind me. You opened the album. I spun around. A woman stood in my kitchen, the young Margaret Blackwood from the photographs. She wore the same 1950s dress from the first picture, but up close, I could see it was faded, worn, like she'd been wearing it for decades. You're not real, I said. She smiled, that same sad smile from the photos. Real is such a limited concept, don't you think? I'm as real as those photographs, as real as what's coming. What's coming? She moved to the table, running her fingers over the album's leather cover. Thomas never understood what he'd created. He thought he was capturing the future, but the camera, it doesn't capture, it invites. Every photograph is a doorway, and once you've seen through it, others can see through it too, I finished. My grandmother used to tell me stories about things like this, about objects that were conduits, bridges between worlds. I'd never believed her. Margaret nodded. The album shows what will be, and by seeing it you make it possible. You give it permission to become real. So the photographs, they're not predictions. They're invitations? Invitations. Warnings. Promises. It depends on your perspective. She opened the album, flipping through pages I'd already seen. Thomas took my picture every day for a year before we married. He said he wanted to capture every version of me, but what he really captured was every possible future, every path our life together might take. She stopped at a photograph I hadn't seen before. It showed her and Thomas together, old and gray, sitting on a porch swing. Happy. This was the future I wanted, she said softly. But it wasn't the one the album chose. What do you mean? She flipped pages, faster now. The photographs blurred past.
Margaret and Thomas at different ages in different places. But in each one, those shadows lurked, growing darker, growing closer. "The album doesn't just show futures," she said. "It feeds on them. Every photograph taken is a moment stolen from what could be, and the things that live in the spaces between moments, they're always hungry for more." She stopped at a photograph that made my stomach drop. It showed Thomas at the top of the basement stairs. Behind him, barely visible in the darkness, a hand. Reaching, pushing. "You killed him?" Margaret shook her head. "I tried to warn him, tried to destroy the camera. But by then it was too late. The album had shown his death, and so his death became inevitable. The shadows, they're not evil, exactly. They're just inevitable. They exist in the spaces between one moment and the next, between what is and what will be. And once you've seen them, they can see you," I finished. "Smart girl." She smiled again, but it didn't reach her eyes. "You remind me of myself at your age. So curious, so foolish." The room had grown cold. I could see my breath misting in the air, and in the shadows at the edges of my vision, I could sense movement, things gathering, waiting. "How do I stop it?" I asked. "How do I get rid of the album?" Margaret laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You can't. It's part of you now, just like it became part of me. Every midnight, a new photograph. Every photograph, a new future. And eventually..." She gestured to herself, and I understood. She wasn't really here. She was just another photograph come to life. Another future made real by the album's hunger. "How long do I have?" She looked at me with something that might have been pity. "You've seen the October 31st photograph. The album has already chosen your future. The only question is, will you fight it? Or will you accept it, like I did? You didn't accept it. You're still here, still trapped." "Am I trapped? Or am I exactly where I'm supposed to be?" She moved toward the window, looking out at the parking lot below. "They're gathering already. Can you feel them? All the futures that never were. All the moments that got swallowed. They're drawn to the album like moths to flame." I looked out the window and saw them. Shadows in the parking lot, just like in the photograph. Dozens of them, all looking up at my apartment. "What do they want?" "To be real, to be remembered, to be photographed." Margaret turned back to me. "The album will show you more futures, some beautiful, some terrible, all possible, and with each one you see, you'll feed them, make them stronger, until eventually..." "Until October 31st. She nodded. Unless what?" But she was already fading, becoming translucent. The first light of dawn was creeping through the windows, and Margaret Blackwood was just a photograph again, just a memory of a future that might have been. I was alone, but not really alone. I could feel them now. The shadows, waiting in the corners, waiting for midnight, waiting for their turn to be real. I had 3 weeks to figure out how to break the cycle. 3 weeks before October 31st. 3 weeks before I became just another photograph in an album that no one would ever throw away. But first, I had to survive tonight's photograph, because I could feel it coming. Midnight was hours away, but the album was already warm on the table, already hungry, already choosing which future to show me next. And I was terrified that I already knew what it would be. The next 2 weeks blurred together like a double exposure. Reality layered over reality until I couldn't tell which was the true image. Every midnight brought a new photograph. Each one showed me closer to October 31st, and in every image, the shadows grew more solid, more real. I saw myself in places I'd never been, with people I'd never met. But the strangest part? Some of the photographs started coming true. October 18th, the album showed me at a coffee shop on Congress Street,
spilling my latte on a man in a blue suit. The next day, I tried to stay home, but my laptop died, and I needed Wi-Fi to finish a project. I ended up at that exact coffee shop. And yes, I spilled my latte on a man in a blue suit. His name was Daniel, and he was surprisingly nice about it. October 22nd, a photograph of me at the grocery store, reaching for the last Honeycrisp apple at the same time as an elderly woman. I went to 3 different stores trying to avoid it, but somehow I always ended up at the Hannaford on Forest Avenue, reaching for that apple, meeting her eyes. Her name was Grace, and she let me have it. The album wasn't just showing my future anymore, it was creating it, weaving me into a pattern I couldn't escape. By October 30th, I'd stopped trying to run. What was the point? Every photograph came true, one way or another. The album was patient, inevitable, like Margaret had said. That night, the last night before Halloween, I sat at my kitchen table with the album open in front of me. I'd spent hours studying every photograph, looking for patterns, clues, anything that might help me understand. The shadows in the parking lot had grown bold. I could see them from my window, no longer hiding. They looked like people now, ordinary people, waiting. At 11:45, my phone rang. My sister. "Sarah, I'm at the airport. I'm coming to get you." "Jess, no, don't come here. It's not safe." "I don't care. You're my sister. Whatever's happening, we'll face it together." I wanted to cry, wanted to tell her I loved her, but all I said was, "Check into a hotel. Don't come to the apartment. Please, Sarah. Promise me." She sighed. "Fine, but I'm here, okay? You're not alone." I hung up and watched the clock. 11:58, 11:59, midnight. The album's pages fluttered one last time, and the final photograph appeared. It showed my apartment, but transformed. The walls were covered in photographs, thousands of them. Every image from the album had been pulled out, made real, covering every surface like wallpaper. And in the center of the room stood everyone I'd seen in the past weeks. Mrs. Blackwood, young and old, Thomas, the man in the blue suit, Grace with her apple. Others I didn't recognize. All the shadows given form. And me. I stood in the middle of them all, holding an old camera. Thomas Blackwood's camera, I realized. The one that had started it all. But here's the thing. In the photograph, I wasn't afraid. I was smiling, and I was taking a picture of whoever was looking at the album. Taking a picture of you, right now. As you're listening to this, I understood then. The album didn't trap people. It recruited them. Every person who'd owned it, who'd looked through it, who'd seen their future. They became part of its story, part of its hunger for more futures, more possibilities, more moments to steal and preserve and transform. Tomorrow was Halloween, October 31st, the day the photograph promised I would join them. But I had one advantage Margaret Blackwood hadn't. I'd seen what happened to her. I knew how the story was supposed to end. So I did the one thing the album couldn't predict, the one future it hadn't shown me. I picked up my phone and started recording, started telling this story, your story now. Because here's the secret the album doesn't want you to know. It needs an audience. It needs someone to look at the photographs, to make them real. Margaret couldn't escape because she kept it hidden, kept it secret, fed it with her fear and her solitude. But I'm not keeping it secret. I'm telling everyone. I'm showing you what's coming. And maybe if enough people know, if enough people see, the pattern will break, the future will change. Or maybe I'm just creating more viewers, more victims, more shadows to gather in parking lots, waiting for their turn to be real. I guess we'll find out tomorrow. It's 2 a.m. now as I finish recording this. Halloween is in 22 hours. The shadows are at my door. I can hear them breathing, waiting.
patient as photographs. If you're still listening, if you've made it this far, then you're part of this now, part of the story. The album has your attention, and attention is all it needs. So let me ask you something, and think carefully before you answer. Have you checked your photo albums lately? Really looked at them? Because I'm starting to think we all have one of these albums. Maybe it's not leather-bound. Maybe it's digital, hiding in your phone, updating every night while you sleep. Maybe it's that old shoebox in your closet, the one you've been meaning to sort through. Look closely at the backgrounds of your old photos. Look for shadows that shouldn't be there, faces you don't recognize, moments that seem wrong somehow, like they haven't happened yet. And if you find something, if you see yourself in a future you don't remember choosing, don't keep it secret. Tell someone. Tell everyone. Break the pattern before it breaks you. Because the album is hungry. It's always hungry. And now that you've heard this story, now that you know it exists, it knows you exist too. Sleep tight. Sweet dreams. And whatever you do, don't look at your photos at midnight. But you will, won't you? You can't help yourself now. None of us can. The album is waiting, and so are we. If you're still listening, if this story kept you up, if you're checking your photos right now, leave a comment. Tell me what you see. Share this with someone who needs to know. Subscribe if you dare to hear what happens next. Because this story, our story, it's just beginning. And remember, every view, every share, every comment, it feeds the album. It makes us more real. See you in the photographs. Maybe sooner than you think. Story number 2. They say every town has its secrets, but mine has a traffic light that knows yours if you're watching this at night. Especially if it's past midnight. You might want to turn on another light. Just a suggestion. Because what I'm about to tell you happened 3 weeks ago, and I still can't drive through that intersection without my hands shaking on the wheel. Before I start this story, and trust me, you'll want to hear every word, I need to ask you something. When was the last time you sat at a red light, completely alone, and felt like something was watching you? Not from the shadows, not from behind, but from the light itself. If that sounds crazy, well, maybe it is. Or maybe you just haven't met the right traffic light yet. Subscribe now if you want to hear more stories like this. Because after what happened to me, I've been collecting them. And you wouldn't believe how many people have their own midnight traffic light story. Hit that notification bell too, because the next one might be about the intersection in your town. All right. The story is starting now. My name is David Chen, and I worked, the late shift at Mercy General Hospital in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Not a big city, not a small town either, just one of those places that's perfectly in between, where everyone knows everyone, but not quite everyone's business. I'd been doing the 11 to 7 shift in the IT department for about 2 years. Good money, quiet work. The kind of job where you mostly reset passwords and restart servers while the rest of the world sleeps. The only downside was the drive home. 15 minutes through empty streets that felt longer every morning. There's this intersection, Maple and 3rd, right where the old part of town meets the new development. During the day, it's busy. Strip mall on one corner, gas station on another, abandoned Blockbuster Video that's been coming soon as a mattress store for 3 years now. But at night, especially after midnight, it becomes something else. The traffic light there has been broken for as long as anyone can remember. Well, not broken exactly. During the day, it works fine. Regular cycles, green, yellow, red. But after midnight, and I mean exactly midnight, like someone flips a switch, it stays red. Always red.
never changes. The locals all know about it. We treat it like a stop sign after dark. Look both ways. Make sure no cops are around, and roll through. The city council keeps saying they'll fix it. The mayor promised during his last campaign. But somehow, it never happens. Budget issues, they say. Higher priorities. I must have driven through that red light 1,000 times. Maybe more. Always the same routine. Slow down, check for headlights, cruise through. Sometimes I'd see other night shifters doing the same thing. We'd pass each other like ships in the night, both pretending we didn't just break the law together. But 3 weeks ago, on a Tuesday, everything changed. I remember it was Tuesday because I'd stayed late to help with a server migration. Didn't leave the hospital until almost 1:30 in the morning. My eyes burned from staring at screens. My back ached from hunching over keyboards. All I wanted was my bed, maybe a beer if I could stay awake long enough to drink it. The streets were emptier than usual. No other cars, no late-night joggers. Even the 24-hour gas station looked deserted, just the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing over empty pumps. I hit every green light on the way, except for Maple and 3rd. Of course. As I approached, I did what I always did. Foot off the gas, quick scan for cops, nobody around. But instead of rolling through, I stopped. I don't know why. Maybe I was more tired than I thought. Maybe some part of my brain finally said, "Enough with the law-breaking, David." But I stopped. Full stop. Sitting there at 1:37 in the morning, waiting for a light that never changes. The red glow filled my car, painted everything crimson. My hands on the steering wheel, the dashboard, even the air seemed tinted. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, feeling foolish. Then a minute, then 2. That's when I noticed the humming. Not from my car. I'd turned off the radio blocks ago. This was coming from outside. Low and steady, like electrical wires in the rain, but rhythmic somehow, almost like breathing. I looked up at the traffic light, and for the first time in 2 years, I really looked at it. The red light wasn't just on. It was pulsing. So subtle you'd miss it if you weren't staring right at it. Brighter, dimmer, brighter, dimmer. Like a heartbeat. My foot found the gas pedal. Every instinct told me to run that light and get home. But I couldn't move. Not wouldn't. Couldn't. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, but my foot stayed frozen on the brake. The humming got louder, and underneath it, I swear I heard whispering. I couldn't make out words. Just the cadence of voices, many voices, speaking in unison. The red light pulsed faster. The whispering grew more insistent. And then, a tap on my window. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My heart hammered so hard I thought it might crack a rib. But when I turned, it was just an old man. Flannel shirt, mesh trucker cap, the kind of face that's been weathered by decades of Midwest winters. He motioned for me to roll down the window. I hesitated, then cracked it an inch. "You don't want to do that, son," he said. His voice was gravel and smoke, probably from 60 years of Marlboros. "Do what?" My own voice came out higher than I'd like to admit. "Sit here, waiting." He glanced up at the traffic light, then back to me. "Especially not at this hour, especially not when it's watching." When what's watching? But he was already walking away, disappearing into the shadows between the abandoned Blockbuster and a darkened insurance office. I called after him, but he didn't turn around. The whispering stopped. The humming faded. The light still glowed red, but it seemed normal again. Just a broken traffic light. I pressed the gas and drove through, hands shaking the whole way home. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that pulsing red light, heard that whispering. By morning, I'd almost convinced myself I'd imagined it all. Exhaustion plays tricks. Everyone knows that. But I had to know. The next night, I left work at my normal time, midnight on the dot. I took the long way, avoiding Maple and 3rd entirely. Added 10 minutes to my drive, but I didn't care. I did the same thing Wednesday night, Thursday too. By Friday, I was angry at myself. A grown man, scared of a traffic light? Pathetic. So when midnight came, I took my usual route, straight down Maple, right toward 3rd. The intersection was empty. The light was red. I slowed down, ready to roll through like always, and stopped. Not because I wanted to, because I had to. There was a car in front of me, a sedan. Dark blue or black, hard to tell in the dark. Iowa plates. It was just sitting there, exactly where I'd been 3 nights before, waiting at the red light that never changes. I pulled up behind them, leaving plenty of space. Flashed my brights once. The universal signal for, hey, you can go. Nothing. They just sat there. I was about to honk when I noticed something. The car was rocking, slightly, rhythmically, like someone inside was moving. My hand hovered over the horn, but something made me pause. I looked closer. The rocking wasn't random, it was synchronized with the pulsing of the traffic light. The red glow brightened and dimmed. The car rocked forward and back. And I realized the driver was banging their head against the steering wheel, over and over, in perfect time with the light. I threw my car in reverse. Didn't care about proper driving technique, just needed to get away. I backed up 50 feet, tires squealing, then whipped around the car and gunned it through the intersection. As I passed, I caught a glimpse inside the sedan. The driver was a woman, middle-aged. Her face was blank. Eyes open but empty. Blood on the steering wheel where her forehead kept hitting it, and her mouth was moving, whispering in time with her movements. I drove home at twice the speed limit. Ran 2 other red lights. Didn't care. When I got to my apartment, I deadbolted the door and didn't leave all weekend. Monday came too soon. I called in sick. Tuesday too. By Wednesday, my supervisor was threatening to write me up. I had to go back. I took the long route again, every night for a week. But I couldn't avoid thinking about it. That woman, that rhythmic pounding, those empty eyes. So I did what any reasonable person would do. I researched. The Cedar Falls Library has archives going back to the town's founding. Newspapers, documents, photos. I spent my days off digging through them, looking for anything about that intersection. What I found made my blood run cold. 1987. A man named Carl Morrison was found dead in his car at Maple and 3rd. At 2:17 a.m. Cause of death: blunt force trauma to the head. Self-inflicted, the coroner said. He'd been hitting his head against the steering wheel. 1993. Sarah Winters. Same intersection. 3:43 a.m. Same cause of death. 1999. 2 teenagers. Jamie Park and Marcus Wells. 1:11 a.m. They'd been hitting their heads against the dashboard, in unison. 2005. A family of 4. The Andersons. 12:47 a.m. All of them. Even the kids in the back seat. The articles were always small, buried on page 6 or 7, and they all had the same tone. Confusion. Disbelief. Why would these people do this? No history of mental illness, no drugs in their system, just stopped at a red light and beat themselves to death. But here's the thing that made my hands shake as I turned those old newspaper pages. Every single death happened to someone who'd stopped at that light after midnight, and every single article mentioned one detail the police couldn't explain. Their radios were all tuned to the same frequency, 87.9 FM, a station that hadn't existed in Cedar Falls for over 30 years. I should have left it alone, should have kept taking the long way home, should have moved to a different city even.
but you know how it is. When something gets under your skin. When a mystery won't let you sleep. When you need to know, even if knowing might be the worst thing for you. I had to understand what was happening at that intersection. My first mistake was buying the radio scanner. Found it at a pawn shop downtown. One of those old analog models that can pick up frequencies modern radios can't. The guy behind the counter gave me a look when I asked if it could tune to 87.9 FM. "That's below the commercial band," he said. "You looking for pirate stations or something?" I mumbled something about historical research and paid cash. My second mistake was going back to Maple and 3rd, but I was smart about it, or thought I was. I parked a block away at the darkened strip mall. I could see the intersection from there. Watch without being watched. It was a Thursday night, 11:58 p.m. I turned on the scanner, spun the dial to 87.9, and waited. At exactly midnight, the static cleared. What came through wasn't music, wasn't voices. It was patterns. Electronic patterns that made my teeth ache. Rhythmic pulses that matched... Oh God, that matched the beating of my heart. The scanner's little red power light began to pulse in sync. I watched the intersection. The traffic light was doing its thing. That slow, hypnotic pulse. Red, darker red, red, darker red. And on the radio, those electronic patterns grew more complex. Layers upon layers. Like a conversation in a language that predated words. At 12:23, a car approached. A pickup truck. It slowed for the light and stopped. Through my binoculars, I watched the driver. A young guy, maybe 25, wearing a John Deere cap. He sat there for 30 seconds. A minute. Then his head started to nod. Not like he was falling asleep. Like he was listening to music. But I knew what frequency his radio was tuned to now. The nodding grew more pronounced. His whole body started to move. And then, the first hit. Forehead to steering wheel, hard enough to honk the horn. I dropped the binoculars and ran. Sprinted across the parking lot. The scanner in my car was screaming now, those patterns becoming something almost like words. Not English, not any language I knew. But somehow, I understood them. They were instructions, precise, detailed, explaining exactly how to synchronize your movements with the light, how to find the perfect rhythm, how to make the pain feel like purpose. I yanked open the truck's door. The kid turned to me, and his eyes, they were gone. Not missing, just gone somewhere else, tuned to a different frequency. "Hey!" I shook him. "Hey, snap out of it!" He spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was many voices, dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking through his mouth in perfect unison. "The signal must complete. The pattern must continue. The light must feed." Then he turned back to the steering wheel and slammed his head forward again, harder this time. Blood splattered the dashboard. I grabbed him, tried to pull him out of the truck. He fought me, not like a person fights, like a machine following a program. Mechanical, relentless. I'm not a small guy, but it took everything I had to drag him onto the asphalt. The moment he left the driver's seat, he went limp, blinked, looked around confused. "What? Where am I?" Blood ran down his face. "What happened to my head?" "You need to get out of here," I told him. "Now, run. Don't look at the light." He stumbled to his feet, saw the blood on his hands, and took off running. Left his truck right there in the intersection. I should have followed him. Should have run too. Instead, I looked up at the traffic light. It was looking back. I don't mean metaphorically. The red light had changed, shaped itself into something that wasn't quite an eye but served the same purpose. It saw me, knew me. And in that moment, I understood something terrible. The light wasn't broken. It had never been broken. It was hungry.
Every city has intersections where accidents happen. Statistical anomalies. Places where the geometry of the roads, the angle of the sun, the flow of traffic create perfect conditions for disaster. But what if some of those places weren't accidents of design? What if they were designed for accidents? The eye in the light blinked, and I heard my car's scanner, still parked a block away, suddenly spike in volume. The patterns weren't random anymore. They were calling my name. Not David Chen. My real name. The one written in frequencies and flesh. The one that existed before words. I ran. Abandoned the kid's truck. Abandoned my post as watcher. Ran past my car. Couldn't risk getting that close to the scanner again. Ran all the way home, 3 miles through empty streets. The sound of those electronic patterns fading but never quite disappearing. When I finally made it to my apartment, gasping and soaked in sweat, I realized something that made my knees buckle. I could still hear them. Faint, distant. But there, the patterns had gotten inside my head. I didn't go to work the next day, or the day after. I unplugged every electronic device in my apartment, threw my phone in the freezer, covered the windows with aluminum foil like some conspiracy theorist. But I could still hear it. That rhythmic pulsing, growing stronger after dark, loudest at midnight. By the 3rd day, I understood why all those people had stopped at the light, why they'd sat there, why they'd synchronized. The pattern wants to complete itself, needs to. And once it gets inside you, resistance is just delay. The only question is where you'll be when you finally give in. Some people make it home. They beat their heads against walls, desks, kitchen counters. The lucky ones, maybe. At least they die somewhere familiar. Others get caught at different intersections, different red lights. The pattern doesn't care which one. Any will do. But Maple and 3rd, that's where it's strongest. That's where it feeds best. I lasted 5 days. 5 days of that pulsing in my skull. 5 days of fighting the urge to get in my car and drive to that intersection. 5 days of feeling the pattern trying to complete itself through me. On the 6th night, I broke, but I was smart about it. I wrote this all down first, every detail, and I made a decision. If I was going to feed that thing, I was going to poison its meal. I drove to Maple and 3rd at 11:45, parked right at the light. The red glow welcomed me like an old friend. The scanner on my passenger seat was already tuned to 87.9, already singing its electronic song. At midnight, I felt the pattern take hold. My head started to nod. My body started to rock. But I'd prepared for this. Super glue on the steering wheel. My hands stuck fast. Couldn't hit my head if I couldn't lean forward. The pattern screamed in frustration, tried to make me tear my hands free. The pain was incredible. Skin ripping, blood flowing. But I held on. The light pulsed faster. Angry. The voices on the radio grew louder. Not dozens now. Thousands. All the people who'd fed it over the years. All speaking as one. The pattern must complete. The pattern must complete. The pattern must complete. But here's what that thing didn't understand about humans. We're not just patterns. We're pattern breakers. We're the glitch in every system, the virus in every program. I'd swallowed my car keys before I glued my hands down, and as the pattern raged and pulsed and tried to force completion, I bit down on them. Hard. Cut my mouth to ribbons, blood everywhere. But it was my choice. My action, not the patterns. The moment my blood hit the keys, everything stopped. The radio went silent. The light flickered, and for just a second, I saw what was really there. Not a traffic light. Not anymore. Something that had grown around it, fed by it. A thing of angles that shouldn't exist and hungers that shouldn't be felt. It looked at me with its red eye, and I laughed, blood spraying from my ruined mouth, because I understood now. It needed willing participants, needed us to choose the rhythm, choose the pain, and I'd chosen wrong. Deliberately, broken the pattern with chaos instead of order. The thing recoiled, the light went dark. For the first time in decades, maybe longer, the intersection at Maple and 3rd had no light at all. I passed out then. Woke up in the hospital 12 hours later. They said someone found me at the intersection, hands glued to my steering wheel, mouth full of keys and blood. The doctors had questions. The police had more. I told them I'd had a breakdown. Stress from work. They believed it because what else could they believe? The traffic light at Maple and 3rd stays dark now. The city says they're waiting on parts to fix it. But I know better. It's not broken. It's empty. The thing that lived there is gone, starved out, poisoned by a pattern that wouldn't complete. But here's the thing. Here's why I'm telling you this story. Why I need you to listen carefully. There are other intersections. Other lights that stay red too long after midnight. Other places where the geometry bends wrong and the frequencies whisper names. 2 nights ago, I heard from a friend in Des Moines. There's a light there, downtown. Started acting up recently, staying red after midnight. And people have been stopping, waiting. Some of them don't drive away. Last night, someone in Omaha posted about the same thing. Different intersection, same behavior. It's spreading, moving, looking for new feeding grounds. So if you're watching this, if you drive late at night, if you ever find yourself at a red light that won't change after midnight, don't wait. Don't listen to the whispers. Don't let the pattern in. Run the light. Take the ticket. Hell, take a different route entirely, because once it gets inside your head, once that rhythm starts, the only choice left is how you break it. And trust me, you don't want to make that choice. Tell me in the comments. Has anyone else noticed lights staying red too long in their town? Any intersections that feel wrong after dark? Any frequencies your radio picks up that shouldn't exist? Subscribe if you want to hear more about what I've learned, about the other things that hide in plain sight, the patterns that prey on routine, the hungers that wear familiar faces. And remember, when you're driving late at night and you see that red light glowing in the distance, sometimes the real danger isn't in running it. Sometimes the real danger is in stopping. Sometimes the real danger is in listening to what it has to say. But wait. Before you go, before you click away thinking this is just another story, I need to tell you what happened yesterday, because I thought it was over. I thought breaking the pattern at Maple and 3rd would end it. I thought wrong. See, patterns don't just disappear. They evolve. They find new ways to complete themselves. Yesterday afternoon, I got a package. No return address. No delivery company marking. Just a plain brown box on my doorstep. Inside was the scanner. The same one I'd left in my car that night. The one that should have been in police evidence. There was a note. Handwritten. But the handwriting kept changing. Different styles for different words, like multiple people had taken turns with the pen. The pattern appreciates your innovation. You've shown us new ways to feed, new frequencies to explore. The old intersection was limiting. You've set us free. Thank you, David Chen. See you at the next red light. I burned the note, smashed the scanner with a hammer, threw the pieces in different dumpsters across town. But last night I heard it again. That pulsing, that rhythm, not from any device, from inside my own head, stronger than before. I did some digging, made some calls to other night shift workers. The pattern isn't just spreading to other cities, it's spreading to other things. Traffic lights were just the beginning. The easy prey. Predictable. Stationary. Limited to those who drive at night. But what about elevators that stop between floors after midnight? Washing machines that won't complete their cycles, microwaves that keep running after the timer hits zero, all the machines we trust, all the patterns we depend on, all of them potential feeding grounds. Jenny from pediatrics told me about an elevator in the East Wing. Sometimes it stops at floor 2.5. There is no floor 2.5. But people get off anyway. They're found hours later in the walls, still alive, still pressing buttons that don't exist. Mike from security mentioned the parking garage gate. Arm goes up, arm goes down. Regular pattern. Except some nights it syncs with something else. He's seen people sit there for hours, moving their heads up and down with the gate arm. Up, down, until morning staff finds them, necks broken from the repetition. The pattern learned from me. I taught it that broken rules feed just as well as followed ones. That chaos can complete the circuit just like order. That resistance is just another rhythm. And now I understand the real horror. It was never about that one intersection, that one red light. It was about teaching us to see the patterns everywhere, to feel them, to fear them, because fear is the strongest pattern of all. Every time you stop at any red light now, you'll think of this story. Every time an elevator takes too long, every time a machine acts just a little bit wrong, you'll wonder, you'll listen, and eventually, you'll hear it. The pattern is patient. It doesn't need you tonight, or tomorrow. It just needs you to know it's there, waiting. In every mechanical rhythm, every electronic pulse, every predictable, dependable thing we've built our lives around. So I'll ask you one more time, and please, for your own sake, tell me in the comments, have you noticed anything? Any patterns that feel off? Any machines that seem too eager for your attention? Any rhythms that try to sync with your heartbeat? Because if you're already hearing it, then this isn't just a story anymore. It's a warning. And you need to decide right now, will you break the pattern your way or let it complete itself through you? The choice is yours, but choose quickly. The lights are already watching, and they're learning to be so much more than red. Sleep tight, if you can still trust your alarm to wake you. Sweet dreams, if the pattern lets you have them. And remember, sometimes the real monsters aren't under the bed or in the closet. Sometimes they're in the things we pass every day without thinking, the things we trust to work the same way every time, the patterns we never question, until they question us back. Sleep tight. Story number 3. The coffee shop mirror caught my reflection wrong again. That thin white line across my left palm, it seemed deeper today. Whiter, like old bone showing through. I traced it with my finger while waiting for my latte. Same path I'd traced 1,000 times since I was 7. Mom always said I got it falling off my bike. Funny thing is, I don't remember owning a bike. Medium vanilla latte for Sarah? The barista's voice snapped me back. When she handed me the cup, I saw it. The exact same scar. Same palm, same angle, same length. Our eyes met for half a second. She pulled her hand back fast. Too fast. And turned to the next customer like nothing happened. But something did happen. Because this was the 3rd time this week. If you're listening to this right now, check your left palm. Go ahead. I'll wait. Do you see it? That thin line that runs from the base of your thumb to just below your middle finger? The one you can't quite remember getting? Yeah, that one. Before we dive into what happened next, hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you're going to want to hear how this ends. And if you have the scar, you need to hear it. Now, let the story begin. It started 3 weeks ago at the grocery store. Normal Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special. I was reaching for a box of cereal when the stock clerk's hand brushed mine. We both froze, not because of the touch, but because of what we saw. The same scar. Identical. Like someone had used the same knife. The same angle. The same pressure. "Sorry," he mumbled, but his eyes stayed locked on my palm. Then he practically ran to the back room. I stood there for 5 minutes, staring at my hand, trying to remember. When did I get this scar? The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water. That night, I called Mom. "Hey, sweetie, what's up?" "Mom, how did I get that scar on my palm, the one on my left hand?" Silence. Long enough that I checked if the call dropped. "You fell off your bike. You were 7, don't you remember?" "No, I don't. Did we ever own bikes?" "Of course we did. Pink with streamers. You loved that thing." But her voice sounded wrong, rehearsed, like she was reading from a script she'd memorized long ago. After we hung up, I went through our old photo albums. Hundreds of pictures from my childhood. Not a single bike, not one. The second time was at the DMV. The woman checking my paperwork had it. Same scar, same place. When our hands touched as she passed back my license, she jerked away like I'd burned her. "Everything okay?" I asked. She stared at me, through me. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. "Do you remember?" she whispered. "Remember what?" But she was already calling the next number. When I looked back from the door, she was gone. Another clerk had taken her place. That night, I measured my scar, 3.7 inches. Exactly. I know because I started carrying a ruler, started checking everyone's hands. You'd be surprised how many people hide their left palms. By the end of the first week, I'd found 12 people, all with the same scar, all with the same story about bikes or kitchen knives or childhood accidents, all with that same confused look when they tried to remember details. I started a notebook, names, places, times, looking for patterns. There were none. Different ages, different backgrounds, different cities they grew up in. The only thing connecting us was that thin white line. Martha at the bank was 63. She got hers falling on glass when she was 9. Tyler at the gym was 22. Kitchen accident at age 6. Dr. Peterson, my dentist, had his for as long as he could remember. All left hand, all the exact same length, all the exact same angle, and all of us, every single one, couldn't quite remember it happening. I wasn't sleeping much by then. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw hands, hundreds of them, all scarred, all reaching. During the day, I found myself staring at people's palms on the subway, in elevators, at restaurants. Most people kept their left hands in their pockets or curled into fists, like they knew, like they were hiding. My girlfriend Emma thought I was losing it. "Sarah, you're obsessing. It's just a coincidence. Show me your left hand." "What?" "Just show me." She laughed, but it was nervous. Slowly, she uncurled her fingers. No scar. The relief I felt was overwhelming. Finally, someone normal. Someone who could help me figure this out. "See?" she said. "Not everyone has your weird scar. Can we please just watch the movie now?" But I couldn't focus, because Emma was left-handed, and she'd been keeping that hand under a blanket all night, and when she reached for the popcorn, she used her right hand every single time. I took a sick day from work, told my boss I had the flu. Really. I spent 12 hours at the library, medical journals, newspaper archives, historical records, looking for patterns, mass injuries, unexplained scars, anything, nothing. But I did find something else, a forum, deep in the weird part of the internet where people talk about gang stalking and targeted individuals. A thread titled, "Left Palm Scar, Who Else?" 17 pages of replies, all describing the same scar, all confused about its origin. The original poster was someone called Memory Hole 44. Their post was from 3 years ago. "I know this sounds crazy, but I have this scar on my left palm and I can't remember how I got it. My mom says bike accident, but we never owned bikes. Found 6 other people in my town with the exact same scar, same story. Anyone else?" The replies came from all over. Seattle, Detroit, Miami, London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. Same scar, same memory gap, same vague explanations from parents. I created an account, posted my measurements, my story. Within an hour, 37 private messages, all saying variations of the same thing. Don't dig too deep. One message stood out, from someone called Scar Truth 1987. "Meeting tomorrow night, Cincinnati. If you're serious about answers, be at the Greyhound station at 11 p.m. Look for the man reading yesterday's newspaper." Cincinnati was a 4-hour drive. I should have been scared, should have told someone where I was going. Instead, I felt relief. Finally, answers. The Greyhound station at night is a liminal space. Fluorescent lights humming, homeless folks sleeping on benches, the smell of industrial cleaner fighting a losing battle against decades of grime. I found him in the corner, 50s, tired eyes, reading a newspaper from 3 days ago, not yesterday. I almost walked past. "You're late," he said without looking up. The message said yesterday's paper. No, it didn't. I checked my phone. He was right. It said 3 days ago, but I could have sworn. "Memory's the first thing to go," he said. "Sit." Up close. I could see he'd been handsome once, before whatever had happened to make his eyes so hollow. "How many have you found?" he asked. "Dozens, maybe more. Try thousands, tens of thousands, all over the world, all with the same scar, all with the same memory problems." He held up his left hand. The scar was there, but different, wider, angrier, like it had been opened and closed multiple times. "What happened to us?" He laughed, no humor in it. "That's the wrong question. The right question is, what's still happening to us?" His name was David, or at least, that's what he called himself. He'd been investigating the scars for 15 years, ever since his daughter pointed out that he had the same scar as her teacher, and the mailman, and the neighbor's kid. "I was a detective, Milwaukee PD. Thought I could solve this like any other case, follow the evidence, find the pattern, crack the code. And I found out that sometimes the only pattern is that there isn't one, not one we're allowed to see." He pulled out a folder, photos, hundreds of them, all left palms, all scarred. "These are just from Wisconsin, one state. Imagine how many there are worldwide." But what caused it? Mass hypnosis? Some kind of childhood vaccination gone wrong? A cult? "You're thinking too small and too big at the same time." He leaned in, whispered like the empty station had ears. "What if I told you it's still happening, right now, every night?" I wanted to laugh, to tell him he was crazy, but something in his eyes stopped me, that 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. "Look at your scar," he said. "Really look at it." I held up my palm. The fluorescent lights made the scar tissue shine. "Now, close your eyes. Count to 10. Look again." I did. The scar was different. Same place, same length. But the angle was off by a few degrees, like someone had redrawn it from memory. "That's impossible." "Is it? When's the last time you really studied your scar? Yesterday? Last week? How would you know if it changed?"
My hand was shaking. The scar seemed to pulse, or maybe that was just my heartbeat. "Every night," he continued, "we go to sleep, and every night, something happens. Something we can't remember. Something that leaves a mark. The same mark. Over and over. How would that even work? Someone would notice. Cameras. Family members. Someone would see. Would they? How many people watch you sleep? How many cameras are in your bedroom? And even if they did see, would they remember?" He showed me another photo. Security footage from a hospital. Timestamp 3:47 a.m. The image was grainy, but I could make out rows of beds. All the patients had their left arms extended, all at the exact same angle. This was from a sleep study lab. Friend of mine worked security, said he watched this happen live. But by morning he couldn't quite remember what he'd seen, only kept the photo because he'd emailed it to himself with no subject line. Didn't even remember taking it. We talked until dawn. He had theories, wild ones, government experiments, alien abductions, dimensional rifts, each crazier than the last, but all with one thing in common. We were being marked, tagged, like cattle. "But why the palm?" I asked. "Why not somewhere hidden?" "Because it's personal, intimate. How often do you really look at your palm? But it's always there, always visible if someone knows to look. Like a membership card you can't lose." "Membership to what?" He shrugged. "That's what I've been trying to figure out for 15 years. All I know is, we're not random. We were chosen. For something." As the sun came up, commuters started filling the station. Normal people living normal lives. I watched their hands, counted scars, 1 in 10, maybe 1 in 8. "It's spreading," David said, following my gaze. "When I started looking, it was maybe 1 in 50. Now, look around." "So what do we do?" "You go home. You forget we talked. You live your life. You stop looking at palms." "That's it? Just ignore it?" "Unless you want to end up like me. Divorced, unemployed, living in motels, chasing shadows." He stood, folded his newspaper. "Some mysteries aren't meant to be solved. Some doors aren't meant to be opened." "But check your phone." I did. The messages from Scar Truth 1987 were gone. Our entire conversation. Deleted. "How did you—" But he was already walking away, disappearing into the morning crowd. Just another commuter. Another scarred palm hidden in a pocket. I tried to take his advice. I really did. Went back to work, stopped checking palms, stopped measuring my scar, tried to pretend that night in Cincinnati never happened. For 3 days, it almost worked. Then I woke up with dirt under my fingernails. Not regular dirt. Red clay. The kind we don't have in Ohio. The kind I'd last seen on a trip to Georgia 10 years ago. I'd showered before bed. I know I did. The towel was still damp. My pajamas were clean. But there it was. Red clay packed deep under the nails of my left hand. Only my left hand. I scrubbed until my fingers bled. The clay wouldn't come out, like it had been pressed in with force, like I'd been digging or clawing. Emma noticed at breakfast. "What happened to your hand?" "Nothing, just gardening." "Since when do you garden? And in October?" I kept my hand under the table. "Just trying something new." She stared at me. That look people get when they know you're lying but can't figure out why. "Sarah, are you okay? You've been acting strange for weeks. The palm thing, now this. Maybe you should talk to someone." "I'm fine." "Are you? Because last night—" She stopped, face scrunched like she was trying to remember something. "What about last night?" I don't know. I woke up and you were— No. Never mind. I must have been dreaming. Emma, what did you see?" But she was already grabbing her keys, already heading for the door. "I'm late for work. We'll talk tonight." She didn't come home that night, or the next. When I called, her number was disconnected. Her sister said she'd moved back to Portland months ago, that we'd broken up in July. It was October. I had 6 weeks of memories that apparently never happened. The next morning, more clay. This time with something else, a smell, sweet and chemical. Formaldehyde, maybe, or something worse. I called in sick again, spent the day installing cameras, one in the bedroom, one in the hall, one facing the front door, all with night vision, all motion activated, all uploading to the cloud. If something was happening at night, I'd catch it. That evening. I handcuffed my left wrist to the bed frame. Sounds extreme, I know. But I needed to be sure. If I was sleepwalking, if I was doing this to myself, the cuffs would stop me. I tested them 3 times. Secure. No way out without the key. I put the key in the kitchen, far enough that I'd have to consciously choose to get it. Then I waited, watched the camera feed on my phone until my eyes burned. 10 p.m., 11 p.m., midnight. At 12:47 a.m., the feed cut out, all 3 cameras, same time. When I woke up, the handcuffs were still on, but my left hand was covered in red clay, under the nails, in the creases of my palm, ground into the scar until it looked like a bloody wound. The key was on my nightstand. The cameras showed nothing. 8 hours of blank footage. The motion sensors never triggered, like I'd never moved. But the clay was real. The smell was real. And now, there was something else. A phone number, written on my palm in black ink. 10 digits I didn't recognize. I called it. "You're early." A woman's voice, older, tired. "Early for what? Who is this?" "Check your calendar." I did. There was an appointment, 2 p.m. An address I didn't recognize, in my handwriting. I didn't write this. "Yes, you did. You just don't remember. Come alone. Bring your notebook, the one with all the names." "How do you know about—" She hung up. The address was a medical building on the outskirts of town. The kind that used to be something else. A school, maybe, before being converted. Paint peeling, windows clouded. A place you'd drive past 100 times without seeing. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, watching. No one went in, no one came out. But the lights were on, 3rd floor, corner office. My phone buzzed. Text from an unknown number. "Stop stalling." The elevator smelled like mold and old fear, those scents that seep into places where bad things happen regularly. 3rd floor, down a hallway that felt too long, past doors with no names, to the corner office. Dr. Helen Marsh, according to the nameplate, but the woman who answered my knock looked more like a librarian than a doctor. 70s, gray hair in a tight bun, thick glasses that magnified her eyes. "Sarah, good. You're here. How do you know my name?" She held up her left palm. The scar, but like David's, wider, older. Opened and reopened so many times it was more gap than skin. "We all know each other, eventually. Come in, sit. We have a lot to discuss and not much time." Her office was wrong. Medical degrees on the walls, but the furniture was all wrong. Too soft, too many blankets, like a bedroom pretending to be professional space. "You've been digging," she said. Not a question. "I want answers." "No, you want comfort. You want someone to tell you it's all a mistake, a coincidence, that you're safe. That's not what I offer." She pulled out a file, my name on the tab. Inside, photos. Me as a child, me as a teenager, me last week, all taken from odd angles, all focused on my left hand. We've been watching you, all of you, since the first mark. Who's we? The ones who remember, the ones who've learned to stay awake, to see what happens in the dark. She flipped to a page covered in dates, hundreds of them, going back years. These are your collection nights. Every time you've woken up with clay, with dirt, with that sweet smell in your nose. Collection? Collection of what? Tissue samples, blood, sometimes more, always from the same spot, always through the same scar. My hand throbbed. The scar felt hot, infected. That's impossible. I'd remember. There'd be wounds, evidence. Would there? She held out her palm, ran a finger along the scar. It opened like a seam. No blood, no pain on her face. Inside, not flesh, something else, darker, moving. The scar isn't from an injury. It's a door, one that opens when they need it to, one that heals by morning, one that we can never quite remember. I ran, down the hall, down the stairs, out to my car, drove until I couldn't see that building in my mirror, pulled over, threw up, sat there shaking until the sun set. But I couldn't stop looking at my scar, couldn't stop wondering what was underneath, what was inside me. That night, I didn't sleep. Sat in my kitchen with every light on, coffee brewing, radio playing, anything to stay awake, to stay aware. At 3:33 a.m., I blinked. When I opened my eyes, I was in my bed, left arm extended, palm up. The scar was open, wide, like a mouth, something gray and thin retreating into it, like a worm, like a feeding tube. I screamed, tried to pull away, but my body wouldn't move. Couldn't move, could only watch as the thing withdrew, as the scar closed, as the memory started to fade. No, not this time. I bit my tongue, hard. The pain kept me present, kept me aware. There was someone in my room, standing in the corner, watching, human-shaped but wrong, too tall, too thin, joints bending in directions they shouldn't. It tilted its head, studying me, then spoke, not with words, directly into my mind. You're awake. Interesting. Most never manage it, even with help. What are you? A farmer. Nothing more. Tending the crop, collecting the harvest. What crop? What harvest? It moved closer, glided more than walked. In the darkness, I could see others. Dozens, all standing around beds in other rooms, other houses, all tending their crops. You produce something we need, something that only grows in your kind. The scar is just an access point, a tap in a maple tree, harmful to neither the tree nor the harvester. But the memory loss, the confusion, side effects, unfortunate but necessary. Your minds aren't meant to perceive us, to remember us. So, we help you forget, for your own peace. What if I don't want to forget? It was inches from my bed now. I could smell it, like ozone and old paper. Then you join the others, the ones who remember, the ones who watch, the ones who slowly go mad from the knowledge that they're livestock, that they've always been livestock, that there's nothing they can do about it. It reached out, one long finger toward my scar. Sleep now. Forget. It's kindness. No. I rolled, fell off the bed, crawled toward the door. but it was already fading, the memory going soft, the room spinning. When I woke, it was noon, in my bed. No memory of how I got there, but I'd left myself a note, scrawled on my arm in permanent marker. They come at 3:33 a.m. Don't forget. Don't sleep. They're farming us. I've been awake for 5 days now. Coffee, energy drinks, pills I bought from a guy who deals to truckers. Whatever it takes. The hallucinations started on day 3. Shadow people in my periphery. Whispers in white noise. But I know the difference now, between what my tired brain creates and what's really there. They still come, every night. 3:33 a.m. I watch them work, moving through walls like ghosts, tending their crop. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands. A whole ecosystem of farmers and livestock that we can't see, can't remember. But I remember now, and I'm not alone. David called yesterday. Don't know how he got my number. You stayed awake? Yes. Fool, but brave. Meet me at the diner on 5th, midnight. There are others. The diner was one of those 24-hour places that exist outside of time. Fluorescent lights, cracked vinyl booths, coffee that tastes like motor oil but keeps you vertical. David was in the back corner, but not alone. 6 others, all haggard, all clutching coffee like lifelines, all with scarred palms. The wakeful, David said by way of introduction. The ones who know. Sarah, meet your support group. They had names, jobs, lives they were trying to maintain while knowing the truth. A banker, a teacher, a nurse, a mechanic. Regular people carrying impossible knowledge. How long? I asked. 2 years, said the teacher. Maria, dark circles under her eyes like bruises. 7 months, from the banker, still wearing his tie at midnight. 15 years, from David. You get used to it, or you don't, and then you're not here anymore. Is there a way to stop it? To make them leave? Silence, the kind that answers better than words. We've tried, the nurse finally said. Rita, older, steady hands despite the exhaustion. Moved cities, countries. Doesn't matter. They find us. We're tagged, marked, part of their ecosystem. So we just accept it? Or we remember, David said. We bear witness. We document. Maybe someday, someone will find a way. Until then, we stay awake. We watch. We remember what they want us to forget. They taught me tricks. Micro sleeps. Power naps short enough that the farmers can't complete their work. Caffeine schedules. Pain triggers. How to leave myself notes that I'll believe when the memory fog rolls in. But mostly, they taught me acceptance. We're cattle. Free range but still fenced. Still branded. Still harvested. The scar isn't a wound. It's a port. An interface. A permanent reminder that we're not the top of the food chain. Just another resource. Another crop. I've stopped trying to film them. The cameras never work anyway. Stopped trying to convince others. They can't see until they choose to stay awake. And most choose sleep. Choose forgetting. Choose the comfort of not knowing. But you're still listening. Still here. Which means maybe, just maybe, you're ready to see. Check your palm again. Run your finger along the scar. Feel how it's different than normal scar tissue. How it seems to pulse with your heartbeat. How it's exactly the same as millions of others. Tonight, set your alarm for 3:30 a.m. Brew strong coffee. Sit in your kitchen with all the lights on, and wait. Watch your left hand at 3:33. Watch how the scar starts to open on its own. Watch what comes to harvest, what you grow. And then, decide. Sleep and forget, or stay awake and remember.
They're coming now. I can feel it. That electric tingle that means it's almost time. Almost 3:33. I used to be scared. Terrified. But now? Now I'm just tired. And curious. What do we produce that they need? What grows in us that grows nowhere else? Are we their only crop? Or are there others? Other species? Other worlds? Other farms? So many questions. So few answers. And so little time. If you have the scar, you're one of us. The marked, the harvested, the crop. Welcome to the farm. And if you don't have the scar, check again tomorrow, and the next day, and the next. Because the farm is always growing, always expanding, always looking for new soil. Sweet dreams. Wait, before you go, did you check your palm? Did you find the scar? Leave a comment below. Tell me when you first noticed it. Tell me what story you were told about how you got it. And if you're brave enough, if you're really ready to know the truth, set that alarm. Stay awake. Watch what happens at 3:33. Then come back. Tell me what you saw. Tell me what you remember. Because the more of us who remember, the more of us who stay awake, the harder it is for them to harvest in silence. The harder it is for them to pretend we're just cattle. Maybe we can't stop them, but we can remember. We can witness. We can refuse to forget. Subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell, because I'll be here every week, sharing stories, sharing truths, sharing the things they don't want us to remember. The farmers are real. The harvest is real. And if you have the scar, you're already part of it. The only question is, will you sleep through it? Or will you finally wake up? I'll see you in the comments. If you're brave enough to look, if you're brave enough to remember, if you're brave enough to stay awake. Until next time, check your palm. Set your alarm. And whatever you do, don't let them make you forget. Story number 4. The basement smelled wrong that Tuesday morning. Not like mold or dampness, but sweet, sickeningly sweet, like overripe peaches left in the August sun. I should have trusted that smell. Should have called someone. Anyone. But I didn't. And now I'm not sure if these thoughts are even mine anymore. Before you listen to this story, I need you to do something for me. Check your basement, right now. I'm serious. Look for any new cracks in the concrete, any spots where the floor seems softer than it should be. Because if you find them, you need to leave. Don't pack, don't call anyone. Just get in your car and drive. Still here? Good. Or maybe not so good. Either way, hit that subscribe button. Because after tonight, you're going to want to know if others are experiencing what I'm about to tell you. Drop a comment below if you've noticed anything strange in your own basement. Trust me, you're not alone. Now, let me tell you what really lives beneath Millbrook, Ohio. My name is Sarah Chen, and until 3 weeks ago, I thought the strangest thing about our town was Mrs. Henderson's obsession with lawn flamingos. She had exactly 47 of them. I counted once when I couldn't sleep. Pink plastic birds arranged in perfect spirals across her front yard. I inherited my house from my grandmother last spring, a 2-story colonial on Maple Street, built in 1953. The kind of place where the floorboards creak out family secrets and the pipes sing lullabies at night. Gran always said the house had good bones. I think now she meant that literally. That Tuesday started like any other. Coffee at 6:47 a.m., toast with strawberry jam, NPR playing softly from the kitchen radio. I was heading downstairs to grab my old college textbooks, finally ready to donate them. The basement door stuck, like always.
requiring that special lift and pull technique Gran had taught me. Lift with your knee, pull with your shoulder. She used to say, "This house has its own ways. Sarah, learn them, respect them." I should have paid more attention to her warnings. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, each one singing a different note. Gran used to say she could tell who was coming by the song the stairs played. Mine was always off-key. She said, "Too much doubt in my step." The smell hit me immediately. Sweet, cloying, wrong, like fruit rotting inside honey. But underneath that sweetness, something else, something that made my lizard brain scream warnings. A smell like electricity before a storm, like copper pennies left in rain. I flicked on the light, expecting to find a dead mouse or maybe some forgotten groceries. The 60-watt bulb swayed on its chain, sending shadows dancing across concrete walls. Gran never upgraded to fluorescence, said the old light was kinder, showed things as they really were. Instead, I found a crack in the concrete floor I'd never noticed before, about 3 feet long, maybe 2 inches wide at its widest point, but that wasn't quite right. As I stared, I realized I had noticed it before. In dreams, the kind you forget the moment you wake, leaving only the echo of unease. I dreamed of this crack, of something calling from beneath. But here's what made me step closer. The crack was breathing. I know how that sounds. Believe me. I stood there for a full minute, convinced I was seeing things. Maybe it was the light, or the way shadows fell. But no, the edges of the crack were moving, expanding and contracting in a slow, steady rhythm. In, out, in, out. I grabbed my phone, started recording. The video came out blurry. Of course, they always do when you need them most. But I could see something through the crack. Something that shouldn't have been there. The space beneath should have been dirt, maybe some gravel. Instead, there was depth, real depth, like looking into a well, and far below, barely visible. Something pink and glistening moved. I should have left then, should have called someone. But curiosity is a devil, isn't it? I found myself kneeling beside the crack, peering deeper. The sweet smell grew stronger, making my eyes water. That's when I heard it. A whisper, so soft I almost missed it. But it wasn't coming from the crack. It was coming from inside my own head. Finally, someone notices. I jerked back so hard I fell, scrambling away on my hands, my heart hammered against my ribs. But the voice, God, the voice was still there, soft as silk, patient as death. "Don't be afraid, Sarah. We've been waiting so long." I ran, took the stairs 3 at a time, slammed the basement door, and shoved a chair under the handle. My hands shook as I called my neighbor, Tom Morrison. He'd lived next door for 30 years, knew everything about these old houses. "Tom, it's Sarah. Listen, I need you to come look at something in my basement. There's this crack, and I think..." I paused, realizing how insane I sounded. "I think there might be a sinkhole forming." 20 minutes later, Tom stood in my kitchen, toolbox in hand. He was a big man, former construction worker, the kind of guy who could fix anything with duct tape and determination. "Let's have a look," he said, already heading for the basement door. I followed him down, every step feeling like a mistake. The smell was stronger now, so sweet it made my teeth ache. Tom noticed it too, wrinkling his nose. "That's odd," he muttered, kneeling beside the crack. "Smells like..." He never finished the sentence. His eyes went wide, pupils dilating until they were just black circles. For 3 seconds. He was perfectly still. Then he blinked, stood up, and smiled. But it wasn't Tom's smile. Tom had a crooked grin, one side always higher than the other. This smile was perfect, symmetrical, empty. "Nothing to worry about, Sarah," he said, his voice flat as Kansas highway. "Just the house settling. Happens all the time." He left without another word, walking past me like I wasn't even there. I watched from my window as he crossed his lawn, entered his house, and didn't come out again. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in my bedroom with every light on, listening, because now I could hear them. Whispers rising from the basement like steam. Not just one voice, but dozens, hundreds, all speaking in perfect unison. "Sarah, come back. We have so much to show you." The next morning, I saw Mrs. Henderson in her yard. She was rearranging her flamingos again, but something was different. They weren't in spirals anymore. They were in straight lines, all facing the same direction, all facing my house. "Morning, Mrs. Henderson," I called out, trying to sound normal. She turned, and her smile was perfect, too perfect, just like Tom's. "Good morning, Sarah. Beautiful day, isn't it? Perfect for gardening." I noticed dirt under her fingernails, fresh dirt. But Mrs. Henderson never gardened, hired a service for that. She saw me looking and tucked her hands behind her back. "Just checking on my petunias," she said, but her petunias had died in June. I drove to the library, needing answers. My hands shook on the steering wheel, and twice I had to pull over. Not from fear, exactly, but from something worse. Anticipation. Like my body wanted to turn around, wanted to go back to that crack, to listen closer. Millbrook Public Library was old, older than most buildings in town. Built in 1887, according to the cornerstone. The only building that predated the Holbrook farm. The historical section was in the basement, of course, because everything important in this town seemed to be underground. The stairs down smelled like old paper and vanilla. Safe smells. Human smells. I found myself breathing deeper, trying to clear that sweet stench from my nostrils. But it lingered, coating the back of my throat like medicine. The librarian, Janet Walsh, barely looked up when I asked about the town's history. She was maybe 60. Gray hair in a tight bun, glasses on a beaded chain. Her fingers flew across the keyboard, pulling up archived newspapers from the 1950s. "Looking for anything specific?" she asked. And I was relieved to see her smile was still crooked, still human. "Construction records for Maple Street. My house was built in 53, but I'm wondering what was there before." She found the records quickly. Too quickly, like she'd pulled them before. The original survey maps showed something interesting. Where our neighborhood now stood. There used to be a field, but not just any field. "Holbrook Apiary," I read aloud. "Millbrook's largest honey farm, established 1892, closed 1952 after..." The rest was smudged, unreadable. "After the incident," Janet finished, and now she wasn't smiling at all. "My grandmother told me about it. They found something while digging a new well. Something that shouldn't have been there." She glanced around, then leaned closer. "The whole family disappeared one night. Parents, 4 children, even the dog. They found them 3 days later, all standing in the field, perfectly still. They were alive, but different. Wouldn't speak, wouldn't eat. Just stood there, smiling. What happened to them? State hospital for a while, then they were released, said to be cured, But they all came back here, bought houses on the same street where their farm used to be. She paused. Maple Street? My hands turned cold. Do you remember their names? She didn't need to check. Morrison, Henderson, Chen, Williams, and Garrett. The 5 founding families of our street, the ones who'd been there the longest, including my grandmother. I drove home in a daze. The pieces were falling into place, but the picture they formed made no sense. As I pulled into my driveway, I saw Tom in his garage. He was digging, just standing there with a shovel, digging straight down into the concrete. Other neighbors were out too. Mr. Williams washing a perfectly clean car. Mrs. Garrett trimming an already perfect hedge. All of them moving in rhythm, like they were dancing to music only they could hear. I locked myself inside, pulled all the curtains, but I could still feel it. That presence in the basement, patient and vast. The whispers were constant now, a white noise of voices. You can't fight it, Sarah. You're already part of us. Have been since you were born. My phone rang. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me swipe. Sarah? The voice was young, scared. This is Emma Williams, from 2 houses down. Please, something's wrong with my parents. They won't stop digging. Emma was 17, home from college for summer break. I'd barely spoken to her before, but now she sounded terrified. Meet me at the coffee shop on 3rd Street. I said, don't tell anyone. An hour later, we sat in the back corner of Brewster's, hands wrapped around cold cups. The coffee was bitter, over-extracted, but I kept drinking. Needed something sharp to cut through the lingering sweetness. Emma's eyes were red from crying. She was pretty in that effortless way college kids are. Messy bun, oversized Ohio State sweatshirt, chipped nail polish, normal. Human. Everything the people on our street weren't anymore. It started 3 days ago, she whispered. Dad got up in the middle of the night, went to the basement. I followed him. And she shuddered. There's a hole. Sarah, a big one. And he was talking to it, having a whole conversation with something down there. Her hands trembled as she lifted her cup. Coffee sloshed, spotting the white table. The thing is, he seemed happy. Happier than I've seen him in years. He's been depressed since Mom died, but down there, talking to that hole, he was laughing. What did he say? He kept saying, yes, we understand, we're ready, over and over. And Mom just stood there, nodding along. She paused, confusion crossing her face. Wait, I said Mom, but Mom's dead. She died 2 years ago. Her breath came faster. Why did I say Mom? Sarah, why did I? Who was standing there? Emma, my stepmother, Janet. But I called her Mom. Why would I? Her face went pale. Oh, God. In my head. She is Mom now. The memories are changing. She pulled out her phone, showed me a video, dark, shaky. But I could see figures standing around a hole in the basement floor, a hole that glowed with soft, pink light. There are others, Emma continued. I've been watching. Every house on our street, people are digging, all at the same time every night, 3:33 a.m. I thought about the crack in my basement. Still small. But for how long? We need to leave, I said. Tonight? Before? But Emma was looking past me, her face draining of color. I turned to see half the coffee shop staring at us. All smiling, those perfect, empty smiles. The barista spoke, but it wasn't just her voice. It was all of them, speaking in perfect unison. You can't leave. Sarah, no one leaves. We're all connected now. All one. We ran. Emma's car wouldn't start. Mine neither. Every car on the street sat dead, hoods open, batteries removed. Tom stood in his driveway, holding a wrench, smiling that horrible smile. "It's better this way," he said, voice harmonizing with itself. "Soon you'll understand. Soon you'll be complete." We barricaded ourselves in my house. Emma called the police, but the dispatcher's voice was wrong too, multiple tones, like a chord instead of a note. "All units are busy," she sang. "Please remain in your homes. Everything is perfect." Night fell like a curtain. Outside, the digging continued. I could hear it through the walls, dozens of shovels biting into earth. Emma and I sat in the living room, lights blazing, afraid to sleep. "Why aren't we affected?" Emma asked. "Everyone else on the street?" I'd been thinking about that. "When did your family move here?" 5 years ago. Mine was here from the beginning, but I just inherited the house. Maybe it takes time. Or maybe... I thought about the whispers, how they'd called me by name. Maybe it's already in us. Just waiting. At exactly 3:33 a.m., everything stopped. The digging, the whispers, even the wind. The silence was worse than the noise. Then, from the basement, a sound like breathing, but bigger, as if the earth itself had lungs. Emma grabbed my hand. "Sarah, I can hear it. In my head." I heard it too. Not words anymore, but images, feelings, and vast intelligence. Older than the town, older than anything. It had been sleeping beneath the earth, dreaming, until the Holbrook family dug too deep. Now it was waking up. The basement door creaked open. We hadn't unlocked it. The chair I'd propped against it fell away. "We should go down," Emma said, and her voice wasn't quite right anymore. "It's beautiful down there, pink and warm and perfect." I slapped her, hard. She blinked, shook her head. "Oh God, it's in my head. Sarah, I can feel it crawling around." The neighbors were at the windows now, all of them, pressed against the glass, not trying to break in, just watching, waiting. "The library?" I said suddenly. "Janet wasn't affected. Maybe she knows something." We climbed out through the second-story window, dropping onto the garage roof. The neighbors didn't follow, just turned their heads in unison to track our movement. The streets were empty, but I could feel eyes everywhere, in windows, behind curtains, in the shadows. All connected, all watching through the same vast consciousness. The library was locked, but Janet was inside. She opened the door before we could knock. "I've been expecting you," she said, and her smile was still wonderfully, beautifully crooked. "Come, we don't have much time." She led us to the historical section. The walls were covered in maps, photos, newspaper clippings, all about the Holbrook apiary, all about what they found. "My grandmother was the librarian in 1952, Janet explained. "She documented everything. The Holbrook family found a chamber while digging their well. Natural, but impossibly deep. And at the bottom, something that had been sleeping for millennia." She showed us sketches. Rough, frantic drawings of something that hurt to look at. Not because it was horrible, but because it was too complex for human minds to process. Like trying to see 1,000 perspectives at once. "It's not evil," Janet continued. "Just different. It experiences reality as one unified whole. No separation between thoughts, no individual minds. When the Holbrooks found it, it woke up, and it was lonely. So it took them, I whispered, absorbed them, made them part of itself, and they were happy. Sarah, that's the worst part. My grandmother interviewed them before the state took them away. They said they'd never felt such peace, such belonging. How do we stop it? Janet laughed, bitter as black coffee. You don't stop something like that. You can only delay it. Or, she hesitated. You can complete it. She pulled out an old journal, leather-bound and water-stained. The Holbrook patriarch left this, written after he was cured. He said the entity needed anchors, specific houses built on specific points, a geometry of connection. I thought about the 5 founding families, the 5 houses that had been there longest. It's been building a network, I realized, using our basements for 70 years. Janet confirmed, patient as stone. But something changed recently. It's accelerating. Emma gasped. The new cell tower. They dug foundations last month. Deep ones. Of course. They'd disturbed something, cracked some barrier. Now the whispers were spilling out, spreading faster. There's a way to stop it, Janet said quietly. But you won't like it. The journal was specific. The entity needed 5 points of connection to fully manifest. 5 houses, 5 families, 5 minds willingly given. But if even one connection was severed, burn them, I said. Burn all 5 houses. Janet shook her head. It's not that simple. The houses are just structures. The real connections are the people, the original bloodlines. I felt ice in my veins. The 5 families. As long as even one descendant remains in town, the connection holds. That's why it's been so patient, waiting for all of you to come home. Emma was counting on her fingers. Morrison, Henderson, Chen, Williams, and Garrett. But wait, I'm not related to any of them. Your maiden name, Janet said gently. Your mother's family. Emma's face went white. Garrett. My mom was a Garrett. 5 families, 5 connections, and 2 of them were sitting right here. So we leave, I said. Break the connection by distance. You think others haven't tried? Janet pulled out a map. Red X's marking locations across the country. Every descendant who's left has come back. Within a year, always. They say they feel homesick. Empty. Like part of them is missing. Because part of them was already in the network. Had been since birth. Waiting. The lights flickered. Through the window, we could see people gathering in the street, dozens of them, all standing perfectly still. It knows, Emma whispered. It knows we're fighting it. The whispers rose like a tide, not in our ears, but in our minds, showing us visions of connection, unity, peace. It would be so easy to give in, to stop being alone, scared, separate. You're tired. Sarah, tired of making decisions, tired of being responsible. We can take that weight, share it among us all. It wasn't wrong. God help me. It wasn't wrong. Janet grabbed my shoulders. Look at me, both of you. Look at me. Her eyes were fierce, human, individual. There is another way, she said. But it requires sacrifice. The entity can't take unwilling minds. That's why it's been so patient, so gentle. It needs you to choose. So we don't choose, Emma said. Or, Janet's voice was steady. You choose something else. The connection works both ways. It can absorb you. Yes, but you can also. She didn't need to finish. I understood. If we couldn't break the connection, we could poison it. Would it work? I asked. My grandmother thought so. Fill your mind with chaos, contradiction, impossibility, everything it can't understand. And when it tries to absorb you, we give it indigestion. Emma laughed, wild and scared. The library doors burst open. Tom, Mrs. Henderson, my other neighbors, moving as one, speaking as one. Please don't fight. It's beautiful here. We're never alone, never afraid, never ourselves. I finished. I thought about my grandmother, how she'd lived in that house for 70 years, fighting the whispers, keeping her mind sharp with crosswords, arguments, stubborn individuality. Gran knew, I said. She knew, and she fought it her whole life. Some did, Janet confirmed. But they're gone now. You're the last.
Emma and I looked at each other. Two descendants of the 5 families. 2 links in a chain meant to bind the world.
Behind the crowd, I could see more people emerging from their houses. The Hendricks from Oak Street, the Parhams from Elm, families I'd known my whole life, now moving with that same horrible synchronization. The infection was spreading beyond Maple Street. What do we do? Emma asked. The crowd pressed closer. Their eyes were empty, but something vast looked through them, patient, loving, terrible, and in their faces, I saw something that made my decision. They were happy, genuinely, truly happy. No worry lines, no stress, no fear, just perfect contentment, the kind of peace people spent their whole lives searching for. We go home, I said finally. We go to our basements, and we give it exactly what it wants. Emma understood. I could see it in her eyes. Not surrender, but sabotage. Fill your mind with everything human, I told her. Every contradiction, every doubt, every moment of chaos and confusion, every time you've held 2 opposite thoughts at once. Every paradox, she nodded. Every impossible thing. Every time you've changed your mind, I added. Every opinion you've held then abandoned. Every belief that shifted. Every moment you've been hypocrite, liar, confused, beautiful mess of consciousness. Janet pressed the journal into my hands. There's more. Read it. Understand what you're really fighting. And Sarah? She grabbed my wrist. Your grandmother, she left you something. Page 47. We left the library together. The crowd parted, letting us pass. They knew we were coming home. The walk felt eternal, every step heavier than the last. The whispers promised such peace, such unity. All I had to do was let go. My basement door stood open. The crack had widened into a proper hole now. Pink light spilled out, warm and inviting. I descended alone. The smell was overwhelming, sweet beyond description. At the bottom of the stairs, I could see into the hole, see the vast space beneath our town, the pink flesh that wasn't flesh, the thoughts that moved like living things. Sarah, finally. We've waited so long. I sat at the edge, feet dangling over impossible depth, and I opened my mind, but not to surrender. I filled myself with every contradiction I'd ever felt, love and hate for the same person, Fear and excitement twisted together, the way time felt fast and slow simultaneously. Every paradox, every impossible human moment. The entity recoiled. I felt its confusion, its pain. It couldn't process contradiction, couldn't understand how something could be two things at once. Stop. This isn't... We don't... I pushed harder, remembered every moment of doubt, every changed mind, every time I'd believed two impossible things before breakfast. The messy, chaotic, beautiful horror of being human. The pink light flickered, dimmed. The whispers became screams, somewhere across the street. I knew Emma was doing the same. Two poison pills in a perfect system. Two chaos engines in a machine built on unity. The thing beneath our town convulsed. And for one moment, I saw it clearly. Not evil, not good, just alien. Alone. Trying to cure its loneliness the only way it knew how. I almost felt sorry for it. Then the house shook. The hole began to close, and the screaming stopped. I woke up in the hospital 3 days later, Emma in the bed beside mine. We'd been found unconscious in our basements. Authorities called in for a gas leak that affected the whole neighborhood. Tom doesn't remember digging. Mrs. Henderson swears she's always arranged her flamingos in spirals. The holes in the basements were filled with concrete, blamed on shifting foundations. Everyone's back to normal. Wonderfully, chaotically, individually normal. Except, sometimes, late at night, I still hear whispers, not from below, but from inside. A small voice that sounds like unity, like peace, like belonging. The connection isn't gone. Can't be gone. It's part of us, coded in our bones, waiting. Janet gave me the journal before I left town. Yeah, I left. Sold Gran's house, moved 3 states away, but I can feel it. The pull, the empty place where connection should be. I give myself another month, maybe 2, before I'm driving back to Millbrook, before I'm walking down Maple Street, key in hand. Because here's the truth. We didn't defeat it. We just gave it indigestion. And now it knows that some minds are too chaotic to absorb safely. Knows it needs to be more careful, more subtle, more patient. So check your basements. Watch for cracks that breathe. Listen for whispers that promise peace. And remember, in a world that makes us feel alone, isolated, disconnected, sometimes the scariest monster is the one that offers to take that loneliness away. Forever. Still with me? Good. Hit subscribe, because I'll be updating you on my journey, whether I want to or not. I have a feeling I'll be going home soon, and when I do, I'll need people on the outside to know what happened. Check the comments. Others are sharing their stories. Cracks in basements, neighbors acting strange, towns with too much unity. We're not alone in this, which might be the scariest part of all. Sweet dreams. And whatever you do, don't dig too deep.